Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something incredibly fascinating and, honestly, a little bit terrifying. We are unpacking George Orwell's masterpiece, 1984. But we're skipping the basic plot summary here. Instead, we're going to explore how Orwell illustrates the systematic dismantling of language for total cognitive control. It's essentially a masterclass in how words quite literally shape our reality.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to really think about it. How do you stop a rebellion before it even starts? Well, you don't do it just by building walls or using weapons. You do it by making the very idea of rebellion absolutely impossible to think. Imagine trying to fight back against an oppressive system if you literally did not have the words to formulate a rebellious thought in your own head. That right there is the sheer genius and the absolute horror of the party's strategy in Oceania.
So, that brings us to this famous, totally head-spinning quote, "War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength." Now you read this and your brain immediately registers the cognitive dissonance, right? But a deeper look reveals the chilling logic behind the propaganda. Take war as peace, for example. The party maintains internal peace and unity by keeping the population perpetually at war with a foreign enemy. Because if everyone is terrified of an outside threat, they aren't going to question their own oppression. It's a massive paradox, but it holds the entire society together.
To really understand how they pull this off, here is our cognitive map. We'll kick things off with language as a political weapon, move into engineering thought through Newspeak, explore the doublethink paradox, look at the fate of the individual voice, and finally, wrap up with some really striking contemporary parallels.
Section 1. Language as a political weapon, the theoretical framework.
You know, it's wild to think Orwell wrote this terrifying fiction while battling tuberculosis on a freezing, remote Scottish island. But despite being a novel, it's backed by some incredibly rigorous academic frameworks. Thinkers like Michel Foucault explored how institutions regulate knowledge through what he called discourse and power, while Louis Althusser wrote about how language itself perpetuates dominant ideologies. And this synthesis is just brilliant. You've got Antonio Gramsci's theory of cultural hegemony, which basically argues that the dominant group doesn't just rule by sheer force. Instead, they control the language and the media so effectively that their specific ideology just becomes common sense to everyday people. So this isn't just fiction, it's a literal playbook.
Which leads us directly to the foundational theory behind Orwell's world, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. You might know it as linguistic relativity. The premise is simple but completely devastating. The structure of a language determines your cognition. Basically, if you don't have the words, you don't have the thought. Try the unthinkable technique with me right now. Imagine feeling a deep, burning sense of injustice, but your vocabulary has been completely scrubbed of words like fairness, rights, or oppression. How do you even begin to complain about your situation? You literally can't.
Moving right along to Section 2. Engineering thought through Newspeak, shrinking the mind.
So if the problem for a totalitarian regime is that people might harbor rebellious thoughts, their solution is Newspeak. It's a stripped-down, propagandistic language designed specifically to narrow the range of human thought. The party isn't just censoring books, they are actively censoring the mind. In Newspeak, dangerous words like justice and democracy completely abolished. The word freedom technically still exists, but its meaning is entirely stripped of any political liberty. You can only use it in super trivial contexts, like saying, "This dog is free from lice."
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer starkness of the linguistic shift. Old speak gives us a word like bad, right? It has emotional weight, it has nuance, but new speak replaces it with ungood. By just eliminating a word's opposite and slapping on a prefix, the party removes all the emotional resonance and subtlety. You aren't just losing your vocabulary here, you're losing the actual capacity for complex, critical evaluation. You get locked within these incredibly strict ideological boundaries.
This is captured so perfectly in a chilling quote from the character Syme. He enthusiastically says, "Don't you see the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thoughts? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. The ultimate goal for them isn't just behavioral control. It's to make the very conception of rebellion linguistically impossible."
Section 3. Doublethink and the thought crime paradox, policing the mind.
Now, this is where we see these linguistic rules become deeply internalized. It's one thing to change the dictionary, right? But it's a whole other ballgame to change the human brain. The key mechanism here is doublethink, the capacity to simultaneously accept two totally contradictory beliefs as true. And this isn't just someone making a mistake or being a hypocrite. This is a forced, institutionalized paradox. Citizens are aggressively trained to reject the evidence of their own eyes and ears. By forcing people to internalize contradictions, like ignorance is strength, the party destroys logical thinking altogether, leaving behind nothing but blind obedience.
And if you happen to fail at doublethink, well, you commit thought crime. Notice that this is a purely internal, linguistic transgression. The state doesn't need any physical evidence. The terrifying logic of the party is that thought crime doesn't entail death, thought crime is death. The second your mind wanders outside the prescribed vocabulary, even unconsciously, you're already a dead person walking. Thinking itself becomes the ultimate crime.
To strictly enforce all of this, the state relies on a checklist of 4 mechanisms of erasure. First, censorship, ironically executed by the Ministry of Truth, which constantly rewrites history so the past always matches today's narrative. Second, propaganda, which just floods whatever discourse is left with falsehoods. Third, surveillance. This is primarily done through the telescreen, which completely eliminates any private space for authentic, unmonitored speech. And finally, torture, used not just to punish people, but to violently force ideological conformity.
That brings us to Section 4, The Fate of Individual Voice, Winston's Journey.
Let's ground these heavy academic theories in the tragic story of our protagonist, Winston Smith. His initial act of rebellion is purely linguistic. He starts writing in a secret diary. He writes, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 makes 4." It seems so incredibly simple, right? But in this world, it is a monumental act of defiance. He is attempting to reclaim objective truth and his own linguistic autonomy from a state that insists they literally control math itself.
But as we see, that resistance is incredibly fragile. In the infamous Room 101, Winston is systematically broken down psychologically. The party doesn't just want to kill him, they need to completely rewrite his mental framework through linguistic coercion. It proves that resistance without the freedom of language is completely doomed.
Which leads us to the tragic finale, the ultimate collapse of his resistance. 2 + 2 = 5. He loved Big Brother. Winston's unique, individual inner voice isn't just silenced, it is completely colonized by party discourse. He fully surrenders his rational mind, his language, and his sense of self. The individual ceases to exist as a thinking subject entirely.
So, the crucial point is, Section 5, Contemporary Parallels to 1984, Why This Matters Now.
Why are we talking about a 75-year-old novel today? Because we can clearly see reflections of Orwell's warnings across our modern digital and political landscapes. Just notice how modern institutions use political euphemisms or doublespeak that function exactly like Newspeak. The harsh reality of civilian deaths gets sanitized into collateral damage. The reality of torture becomes enhanced interrogation. This isn't an accident. It is a deliberate linguistic choice designed to obscure the truth and make violent realities more palatable to the general public.
And the mechanisms have evolved right alongside the language. We see phenomena today that perfectly echo Orwell's dystopia. We have the rise of alternative facts and post-truth politics, where emotional appeal constantly trumps factual accuracy, which is a direct relative of doublethink. We're living with unprecedented social media surveillance. And perhaps most insidiously, we have algorithm-driven echo chambers. The internet hasn't inherently liberated our discourse. In a lot of ways, it's fragmented it. Algorithms often suppress dissenting views and manufacture consent, quietly deciding what realities get amplified and what gets completely erased. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to take away from this explainer. If the limits of your language are the limits of your world, who is writing your dictionary? Because, as Orwell so brilliantly illustrated, defending the integrity of language isn't just about being a stickler for grammar. It's the very first step in defending freedom itself. I highly recommend diving into the source material to explore these concepts even further. Thanks so much for joining me to Decode 1984.